I came home last weekend expecting a cold beer and a quiet sunset, and instead found a woman in a white polo shirt turning my handmade boathouse into something that looked like a crime scene from CSI HOA unit. She had a clipboard, a sign that said Lakeside Safety Enforcement, and the nerve to tell me my dock needed a $15,000 0-cents flotation upgrade or I'd be reported to the county. Now, I built that boathouse myself, with sweat, blisters, and zero HOA interference, so being told it was suddenly a floating death trap felt like someone telling me my recliner was a weapon of mass destruction. But what she didn't know was that the very safety gear she demanded would become the propulsion system that sent her on a solo cruise to the middle of the lake at midnight. So there she was, floating out in the dark, screaming into her phone, "I think I'm being kidnapped by a building." And there I was on the shore, sipping my drink and wondering, should I play some Kenny Loggins or let the silence teach her something? Guess where I'm watching from? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're tuning in from, because this story, it's about to take a turn you won't see coming. She introduced herself as Vivian Burke, certified waterfront safety consultant, whatever that means, and proceeded to point at my dock like she was trying to identify a criminal in a lineup. You're lacking emergency flotation devices. Your railings are substandard. You have no warning signage. She might as well have said I was harboring fugitives in my tackle box. I tried to explain, calmly, that this wasn't HOA property, that I didn't live under their rules, and that my dock wasn't open to the public. But she just smiled like a politician announcing new taxes for your benefit. Then she handed me a printed list, complete with letterhead, barcodes, and enough legal jargon to make a paralegal cry, outlining the required safety upgrades. Total cost? Just under $15,000. "You have 48 hours to show progress," she said, tapping her clipboard like it was a judge's gavel. "Or I'll be escalating this to the county." Now look, I've dealt with my fair share of difficult people. You don't spend 20 years fixing other folks' electrical disasters without bumping into a few folks who think Google makes them an expert. But this was something else. This woman had created an entire performance, a mobile inspection office, with paperwork, signage, and a confidence level so high you'd think she was the sheriff of Lake Logic. I'll admit, for about 10 seconds, I doubted myself. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe some new regulation snuck through that made it illegal to have a wooden bench without a seatbelt. That's what people like her count on. That little pause. That moment when someone who's always followed the rules starts to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they've stepped out of bounds. But then I remembered who I am. I follow codes. I pull permits. I overbuild every project because I hate callbacks. And I sure as hell didn't pour 2 years of weekends into this place just to let some clipboard crusader rewrite my shoreline. That night, I couldn't shake it. I sat there at my kitchen table with her report in front of me, a highlighter in one hand and a beer in the other, going line by line through every citation she'd thrown at me. I spent 4 hours digging through county websites, cross-checking safety codes, comparing railing specs, and even called an old buddy who used to work for zoning. And you know what I found? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There were no mandatory inspections for private boathouses, no requirements for Coast Guard-approved railings, no rule that says you need flashing lights to warn your guests that water exists. Her entire report was a well-organized pile of professional-sounding nonsense. She dressed up fiction in the clothes of regulation and expected me to fold because it looked official. That was the moment I knew she wasn't just overstepping, she was running a con. And here's the part that'll really get you. When she walked away from my dock that first day, she probably thought I'd spend the next 48 hours calling contractors and maxing out credit cards trying to comply. But what she didn't know is I'm the kind of guy who treats red flags like invitations to dig deeper. And she'd just handed me a shovel. See, I've dealt with current that can kill, wires that can fry your eyebrows off, and panels that buzz like angry bees. Vivian Burke? She was just another short circuit waiting to be traced. So while she was off rehearsing her next performance at someone else's lakefront, I was dialing up my neighbor Gus, sharpening my plan and getting ready to flip the breaker on her entire operation. Because if there's one thing I know, it's that when someone starts waving fake authority in your face, you don't just stand there and take it. You wire up the truth, flip the switch, and let the whole lie light up for the world to see. Vivian came back the next morning like she owned the shoreline. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like judgment on her nose, and that white polo shirt pulled tight over her self-importance. "Mr. Wells?" she chirped, as if we'd scheduled a meeting and I'd forgotten to bring muffins. "We'll be conducting a follow-up site review to ensure safety concerns are being addressed." She walked the perimeter of my dock like a real estate agent judging a condemned property. Still no flotation devices, still no rail height compliance, still no slip signage. I stood there, sipping my coffee and trying to decide if this woman was actually dangerous or just extremely committed to cosplay. "Vivian," I said, "this is private property, not a community pool." She didn't blink. "Safety has no borders," she replied, like she was quoting a bad motivational poster in a break room. She pulled out her laminated chart, the same one from yesterday, and pointed to a highlighted section titled Lakeside Residential Maritime Code, Section 218B. "As outlined here," she said, "flotation systems must meet current impact thresholds for emergency buoyancy." I blinked. That sounded real, official, almost impressive, but something about it rang hollow, like a knock on drywall where there should have been a stud. "Is that a state regulation?" I asked. "County-level adaptation," she said, flipping pages like she was reading sacred text. I asked to see the regulation in print. She pointed to her QR code. "Scan for details." The code led to a locked PDF. That's when my gut told me, this wasn't just overreach, it was performance art. You ever hear someone say something so official-sounding, so polished, that for half a second you think maybe you've got it wrong? That's how this scam works. It doesn't matter how confident you are in your work. All it takes is one person with a clipboard and a bad-shaped sticker to make you question your reality. I found myself flipping through her pages, scanning for anything that looked familiar from the codes I'd read while building. I had permits. I pulled inspections. I followed every stupid diagram the county threw at me. Still, part of me started to wonder, what if I'd missed something obscure, something buried so deep in local ordinances it only gets cited by people who moonlight as parking lot attorneys? That creeping doubt is the con. It's not about safety. It's about submission. Later that afternoon, I drove down to Gus Mendoza's place. Gus owns the engine repair shop off the old highway and knows every zoning loophole from here to the state line. I walked in holding Vivian's report like it was radioactive. Gus took one look and laughed so hard he almost dropped a carburetor. "She got you with the 218, babe?" he said, wiping his hands on a rag older than both of us. "Code doesn't exist. She made it up. She tried that on the Randall family last month, told them their dock needed environmental LED lighting, charged them $800 for solar garden lights." I stared at the laminated report in my hand and realized I wasn't the first. I probably wouldn't be the last. But I sure as hell was going to be the end. Gus leaned against the workbench and told me everything. Vivian Burke had shown up 6 months ago, claiming to be a licensed safety consultant under Regional Compliance Authority. There was no such thing, but her pitch was good, sounded legal, looked official, and always came with a thick stack of documentation that overwhelmed people before they could question it. 2 days after she flagged violations, a guy named Steve Barrow would appear, friendly as barbecue smoke, offering deeply discounted repairs to bring properties into compliance. The price? Always high enough to sting, but low enough to seem like the safer option. Most folks paid up just to avoid a fight. Gus said he'd already heard from 4 families around the lake. Same pattern, same threat of escalation, same 2 things. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with 2 beers, Vivian's report, and my laptop. I wasn't just annoyed anymore, I was invested. I combed through every citation on her paper, cross-referencing each one with actual county and state codes. Of the 10 regulations listed, 8 didn't exist. The other two were taken out of context and only applied to public marinas. Her report was a carefully designed illusion, like a magic trick made of Helvetica and fear. I looked up her name in the state consultant database. Nothing. No license, no credentials, no record. She didn't exist in any official capacity. Then I searched Steve Barrow Marine Safety. One result, a website that looked like it had been built on a flip phone. No license, no address, no reviews, just a few pictures of docks and a generic contact form. That's when the light bulb flicked on. I realized this wasn't just intimidation, it was theater, a two-person act with costumes, scripts, and props. Vivian played the expert, Steve played the fixer, the homeowner played the fool. But not this time. Not on my dock. Because I'd seen this play before. Different names, different town, but the same manipulative formula. I'd worked on homes for 20 years. I know a fake outlet when I see one, and this operation was wired with fraud. Now, I could have reported her right then, could post it on the community board or warned the neighbors, but no. I wanted this to land. I wanted the lesson to last. So, I decided to flip the script. If she was going to sell me on a $15,000 0-cent safety system, I was going to buy it. My way. The key was letting her think she'd won. Let her keep pushing. Let her recommend more equipment. Let her walk herself right into the trap she thought she was setting for me. Because when people like Vivian feel invincible, they stop being careful. They start showing you their hand. So I texted her the next morning and said I was ready to move forward with Phase 1 of compliance. Her reply came in under 3 minutes. Excellent decision, Mr. Wells. You're doing the responsible thing for your community. The community she wasn't part of. The lake she didn't own. The authority she never had. But that's okay, because I had a new plan now. And I'd just ordered the parts. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. So I let her think she had me. But what she didn't know was that every step she took from here on out was part of my setup. If she wanted a safety demonstration, I was going to give her one she'd never forget. And it'd be fully documented, professionally installed, and, ironically, county compliant. You're not going to believe what happened when her contractor showed up with that quote. Trust me, it gets deeper, dirtier, and way more expensive for them. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because in the next part we go from fake inspections to real consequences. And let me tell you, karma floats. I figured if anyone knew the truth about what was really going on around this lake, it was Gus Mendoza. He's lived 3 cabins down from me for 15 years, runs a small engine repair shop out of his garage, and somehow knows everything from which neighbor's cat broke into whose grill to which county inspector actually matters. I rolled up with Vivian's laminated safety gospel and asked him straight, "You ever heard of Section 218B of the Lakeside Residential Maritime Code?" He laughed so hard I thought he was going to drop the carburetor he was working on. 218B? He wheezed. That's not a code. That's something she made up to sound scary. Same thing she used on the Raymonds last month. Charged them $1,200 to replace 3 dock boards with the same ones she said were non-compliant. That's when Gus started pulling out receipts. Literal receipts. Handwritten invoices, notes from neighbors, even a photo of Vivian in the same white polo shirt standing beside her folding table at someone else's dock. "She's been running this lake like a storefront with no lease," he said, "and she always brings in this guy named Steve Barrow, shows up 2 days later, offers discounted compliance packages with prices so padded you could sleep on them." I asked if Steve was a real contractor. Gus just grinned and said, "Only if business cards from Kinko's count as licensing." He handed me a printout of Steve's website, and I swear to you it looked like it was built on a microwave in 1998. A few stock images, a quote request form, and a logo that looked suspiciously like clip art. No license number, no business address, not even a real contact page, just a phone number that led to a voicemail message from Marine Safety Solutions Incorporated. And even that sounded like it was recorded in a garage full of barking dogs. I spent the next few hours doing what most folks never bothered to do, digging through actual building and safety codes for lakeside structures. Every single citation in Vivian's report was either made up, misapplied, or pulled from guidelines that didn't apply to private property. The so-called emergency flotation system she claimed I needed only required on public marina docks. The railing height standard, optional for private boathouses and even then only recommended in storm zones. The signage regulations, meant for rental properties, not personal docks. The more I read, the more obvious it became. Vivian wasn't enforcing anything real. She was banking on people being too busy, too tired, or too trusting to fight back. And the way she'd packaged it, clipboard, laminated forms, QR codes, it all gave off that "I'm official, so don't ask too many questions" vibe. Classic paper, power move. But now I had the one thing that cuts through a scam faster than a hot knife through paracord: truth in writing from actual sources. That's when the shift happened. I wasn't just mad anymore, I was focused. I took all her fake citations, laid them out side by side with the real ones, highlighted every mismatch, and built a folder that would make a junior paralegal proud. Then I started calling around to get real quotes. Not from Steve, my website's a PDF barrow, but from legitimate marine supply companies. Turns out, everything on her list, life vests, warning signs, LED dock lights, rail reinforcements, could be bought for just under $3,000, installed, with real warranties. And that's when the poetic twist hit me. Vivian said I lacked flotation safety. Turns out she was the one about to drift, because I wasn't just going to prove her wrong. I was going to use her own shopping list to float her scam right into the middle of the lake, literally. The plan came together that night. It was simple in theory, tricky in practice. I'd buy the exact equipment she demanded, but instead of installing it the way she expected, I'd integrate it into a hydraulic flotation system, hidden in plain sight. Something that could lift my boathouse off the shore and send it floating gently into the water with the push of a button. The system would look fully compliant: Coast Guard railings, high visibility signage, battery backup lights, but underneath it would be wired to give Vivian the live safety demonstration she never asked for. And when the day came for her final inspection, well, let's just say she'd be in for a ride. The kind you don't forget, or return from with your ego intact. Because here's the truth. Scammers like Vivian build their racket on three things: fear, confusion, and silence. But when you cut through the noise, check the facts, and speak up, that racket falls apart faster than Steve's website under a dial-up connection. I was done being the mark. It was time to turn this whole $15,000 0-cent shakedown into a $3,000 0-cents revenge cruise, and believe me, it was going to be one smooth launch. Stick with me. Next up, I start wiring up poetic justice. And Vivian? She's about to board the first-class seat. I always say, when life hands you a scam, hand it back with a schematic. Gus and I got to work that weekend like we were prepping for a covert operation. And in a way, we were. Only instead of spy gear, we had marine-grade flotation tanks, hydraulic jacks, and enough electrical wiring to make OSHA nervous. The plan was simple on the surface: install every piece of equipment Vivian had listed in her fake compliance report. But buried inside that compliance was our surprise. We were going to build a fully functional, self-contained flotation system that could, on command, lift my boathouse and float it away like a parade float from the underworld. It looked like safety gear, but it was really a first-class boarding pass to poetic justice. If irony had a power switch, we were installing it behind the fuse panel. The trick was hiding everything in plain sight. The flotation chambers were built into reinforced side panels that looked like extra support beams. The hydraulic pump system got tucked inside what we labeled as an electrical safety cabinet. We even wired the main control system into a mock breaker panel with switches labeled in perfect bureaucratic lingo like emergency buoyancy compliance override and dock stabilization regulator. Gus said I was getting too fancy. I told him if we were going to prank a fake inspector, we needed to do it with more polish than a politician's apology letter. The whole setup was over-engineered, overbuilt, and over the top. But that's what made it beautiful. The safest scam trap in lakeside history. Every time Vivienne came by to inspect progress, she unknowingly beta-tested her own launch pad. She'd tap the new railings. "Coast Guard spacing, of course!" and nod with that condescending approval like she was grading a school project. "Glad to see her taking this seriously," she'd say, pointing at my warning signage. "Watch your step." Never felt so prophetic. She even had the nerve to recommend an overnight system observation once installation was complete. Claimed she needed to verify how the flotation devices would respond to humidity changes and overnight temperature shifts. I nodded and told her that sounded very responsible. Gus nearly choked trying to keep a straight face. We were wiring her stage, and she was volunteering to stand on the trap door. By the end of day 3, the system was flawless. We tested every function: hydraulic lift, tilt sensors, pressure regulators, emergency retract switch. I had 3 layers of fail-safes wired in just in case something went sideways. This wasn't about hurting her. This was about education. Delivered by flotation. The final touch was a remote trigger installed in a hollowed-out switchbox on my deck. Wireless, quiet, reliable. One click and the boathouse would gently rise, detach from its mounts, and float into the center of the lake like some biblical judgment disguised as a building permit. We even added a courtesy anchor to keep it from drifting too far. It wasn't just compliance, it was comedic compliance with character. The night before her final assessment, I stood on the dock and looked over the structure. It was quiet, peaceful. Everything was in place, both the real safety gear and the trap hidden beneath it. There's a strange satisfaction in building something with that much dual purpose. On one hand, it complied with every legitimate standard. On the other, it was the most sophisticated prank I'd ever conceived. And underneath all of it was the justice of knowing that for once the scammer was stepping into a world where we set the terms. I didn't know exactly how she'd react once the dock started drifting. Would she panic? Deny? Try to call her buddy Steve to float in and rescue her with a forged invoice? It didn't matter. Because no matter how she spun it, she was about to experience a safety demonstration she'd never forget. And for once, it'd be on the record. Vivienne arrived right on schedule the next evening, clipboard in hand and confidence dialed to 11. "I'll be setting up my monitoring station inside," she announced, wheeling in a rolling case with cables, clip lights, and what looked like a camping coffee maker. "Expecting a long night?" I asked. She smiled, like a cat walking into an open birdcage. "Real safety inspections require real-world testing," she said, setting up folding chairs and pinning her badge to her shirt like it meant something. I told her I'd be available if she needed anything. "Appreciate your cooperation," she said. Then she shut the door behind her, completely unaware she just volunteered as tribute for the most elegant comeback a con artist has ever walked into willingly. "Stay close. Because when the lights go out in next part, the real show begins, and the building starts to move." By the time night fell, Vivienne had set herself up like she was doing a live broadcast from the International Space Station. She brought 2 lanterns, a folding chair with lumbar support, and what she proudly referred to as her weather variance audit kit. It looked like she robbed a camping aisle and a printer cartridge. She even had a thermos labeled inspection fuel and a clipboard resting on a crate like it was sacred scripture. I asked if she needed anything else, maybe a parachute. "All good," she said, zipping her windbreaker. "If conditions shift overnight, I want to observe system response firsthand." Well, that part was guaranteed, because what she didn't realize was that her overnight variance audit was about to become a moonlight maiden voyage powered by the very safety gear she forced me to install. Around 11:58 p.m., I stood by the window with a cold one in hand, watching the glow from the boathouse flicker through the trees. It was a quiet kind of tension. You ever rig something up so well you almost start to believe it won't work? That was me. Second-guessing my wiring, double-checking every sensor in my head. But then I saw the shadow of Vivienne pacing inside, talking to herself like she was rehearsing. "Courtroom testimony." And I remembered exactly why we built this thing. At midnight, I pressed the button on the disguised panel next to my grill. No clicks, no beeps, just silence and motion. The hydraulic lift hissed quietly as the flotation chambers activated and began pushing the entire boathouse up and out, 1 inch at a time. And like a gospel miracle, the structure began to float. At first, she probably thought it was just the lake being restless. Then came the sound of anchor bolts easing free, like a deck sighing in disbelief. I saw her lights blink once, then again, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone stumbling and knocking over a coffee mug. Then the door flung open, and there she stood, clipboard in one hand, confusion plastered across her face like sunscreen applied by a toddler. "What the hell?" she yelled into the dark. "Is this thing moving?" She turned in a slow circle, realizing that the shoreline was no longer where it used to be. "Oh my God. Oh my. Logan?" Her voice cracked like a radio on low batteries. "I think I'm being kidnapped by a building." And yes, that's a direct quote. It's also now the stuff of legend. She whipped out her phone and called 911, pacing the deck in fuzzy slippers while the boathouse floated steadily toward the middle of the lake. "Yes, I need help," she shouted. "No, I'm not hallucinating. I'm in a building that's drifting across water. It's moving! The building is moving! I think I'm being abducted by infrastructure." I could hear the dispatcher's confusion all the way from my porch. Meanwhile, Gus was filming from his deck, 2 cabins over, cackling like a man who just watched karma get delivered by FedEx. "This is gold," he whispered into his phone. "She's about to accuse a doc of criminal activity." It was equal parts ridiculous and righteous. Ever see a bureaucrat realize she's been hoisted by her own clipboard? It's a beautiful thing, like watching someone drown in the pool they swore was dry. By the time the sheriff's boat arrived, Vivian had wrapped herself in a blanket, still holding her clipboard like it could summon dry land. Officer Jenny Clark, who'd been patrolling the lake for years, pulled up slowly, spotlight sweeping across the scene like she was trying to make sense of a floating crime scene. "Ma'am," she called out, "are you injured?" "I've been kidnapped," Vivian screamed, by a structure. It was attached to the shore, and now it's floating. "He did something to it. He rigged it." Officer Clark raised an eyebrow and radioed it in. Then she turned her light toward me on the shore. I waved with my beer and said calmly, "Evening, officer." She docked at my pier 5 minutes later, boots crunching on gravel like this was just another Friday night for lakeside law enforcement. "Mr. Wells," she said, "I assume you have some explanation for why your dock is adrift." "Absolutely," I said, handing her a folder. Inside was every blueprint, permit, and invoice, including printed copies of the real safety codes Vivian had violated with her fraudulent nonsense. "The building's perfectly safe," I added. "Fully compliant, structurally sound, and equipped with the flotation system Vivian demanded, installed exactly to her specs." Officer Clark flipped through the folder like she was scanning for explosives. "And the launch?" she asked. "That was a systems test," I said. She insisted on verifying buoyancy under natural conditions, just fulfilling the request. Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but not a smile either. "You documenting this, Gus?" she called out. "Every second?" Gus replied from his deck, holding up his phone like an Oscar. Vivian was escorted back to shore 20 minutes later, her voice now low and muttering things about legal action, maritime sabotage, and property rights. But the energy had changed. She wasn't the one issuing demands anymore. She was trying to climb out of the very mess she'd built, like someone who rigged a trap only to fall in face first. Officer Clark turned to me and said, "This might be the weirdest call I've had in 3 years." I told her, "You haven't met the guy with the folder yet?" She raised an eyebrow. "There's more?" "Oh yes, officer, there's a whole file cabinet coming," because the next person to speak wasn't me. It was a quiet old man with a coffee-stained folder full of receipts, printed emails, and a calm voice that could split courtrooms in half. You'll want to hear what he has to say, because this ride, it's just getting started. Officer Clark hadn't even closed her folder when a quiet voice from behind us said, "Actually, there's a lot more to this." We turned around to see Ira Baldwin, my next-door neighbor, 72, retired, mild as unsalted toast, walking up the gravel path like he'd been waiting for his moment. Ira was the kind of man you waved to for years and never really talked to. Wore the same tan hat, carried the same thermos, always reading mystery novels on his porch. Turns out, he was the mystery novel, because when he opened the folder in his hands, it didn't just contain notes. It contained evidence. "I've been tracking this woman and her partner for the last 4 months," he said, calm as a church fan. "Their operation spans 4 counties, 3 states, and at last count had defrauded homeowners and insurers for over $500,000. We all just stood there, letting that sink in. Vivian, real name Margaret Ellen Price, had a criminal record in at least 2 other states. Steve Barrow? Also fake. His real name was Jason Miles, and he wasn't licensed to operate a lemonade stand, let alone do dock installations. I laid it all out. Dates, payment records, phone logs, screenshots of her fake certification sites, even drone footage from another lake showing the same scam in progress. Officer Clark called for backup. Within 48 hours, the case was kicked up to the state attorney general's office. Then the FBI got involved, and suddenly my floating boathouse prank became Exhibit A in a multi-state fraud investigation that stretched wider than any of us could have imagined. The scam wasn't just local, it was mobile, methodical, and deeply profitable. Until it floated into the wrong backyard. The FBI confirmed everything. Vivian had been using rotating aliases and forged credentials for years, moving from lake to lake, targeting older homeowners with fake safety inspections. Steve, Jason, would roll in right behind her to fix violations they'd invented. Then they'd file inflated insurance claims for the same work, doubling their payout. It was a hustle wrapped in authority and sealed with bureaucracy. But this time, they hit a snag. A guy who builds smarter than he panics, and a neighbor who used to investigate white-collar crime for a living. Vivian's clipboard empire had finally sunk. The agents who visited me said my documentation, plus Gus's video and Ira's folder, provided everything they needed for a takedown. The look on Vivian's face when she realized it was federal. Let's just say it was less clipboard and more mugshot. News traveled fast. The local paper ran the headline, "Inspector floated into federal charges." I was interviewed by the regional news station while standing next to the very boathouse that started it all. "So you installed the flotation system," she demanded, just not quite how she expected, the reporter asked. "Exactly," I smiled. "Sometimes justice doesn't knock, it floats." And from that day forward, my dock had a new sign bolted to the side. "Inspected. Scammers will be float." People started stopping by just to take pictures. I even got a few calls from homeowners associations asking if I did consulting. I told them, only if you're paying me in truth and beef jerky. In the end, the safety gear she forced me to buy actually made the dock better. The railings were sturdier, the lighting helped with night fishing, and the signage kept the grandkids from slipping. Total cost? Just under $2,000, 0 cents. Real upgrades from real vendors, not the 15 grand of fantasy fluff she tried to sell me. But the biggest upgrade wasn't to the dock. It was to the community. Word got around. People started checking licenses, questioning inspections, and pushing back on fake authority, dressed in polo shirts and laminated lies. Because of one floating boathouse, 5 other lakeside neighborhoods caught and stopped similar scams in progress. The story had floated. And so had awareness. That's the tale. One crooked clipboard, one nosy neighbor with a PhD in receipts, and one floatable dock with a button that turned scam into spectacle. You know, I used to think scams were something that happened in email inboxes and Nigerian Prince stories, but the truth is, con artists evolve. They learn how to wear authority like a badge and pressure good folks into silence. But not this time. We flipped the script. We turned fake safety into real consequences. And somewhere out there, Vivian, aka Margaret, is probably still trying to explain to her cellmate how she got engineered by a guy with a power drill and a grudge. Ever been scammed by fake authority? Drop it in the comments. Seriously, I want to hear about it. And if you liked how justice sailed off into the night, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got more madness on deck. Because around here, the only thing more dangerous than a crooked clipboard is a doc that fights back. And when it was all said and done, when the feds packed up their files, when Vivian's clipboard was locked behind an evidence room door and the neighbors could finally breathe without flinching at the word inspection, I walked back down to my dock, cracked open a cold one, and just listened to the water. Same lake, same view, but everything had changed. Not because I built something that floated, but because I stood up. And not just for myself. I stood up for every decent homeowner who's ever been bullied by someone in a badge polo shirt, quoting imaginary rules and weaponizing confusion. I didn't just protect my dock. I helped protect a community. And all it took was a little wiring, a little wit, and a willingness to say, not this time. Because this story, it wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. It was about reminding people that just because someone shows up with a clipboard doesn't mean they hold the truth. And just because you're not loud doesn't mean you're powerless. Vivian tried to sell fear wrapped in paperwork. But fear doesn't float. Truth does. And when we start asking questions, when we dig a little deeper and stand a little taller, bullies don't stand a chance. In the end, the real safety upgrades didn't just protect my dock. They protected my dignity, my neighbors, and maybe a few strangers I'll never even meet. And that's worth every screw, every bolt, every midnight push of that beautiful little button. So if this story made you laugh, made you think, or made you clench your fist when Vivian said, "You have 48 hours," then you're exactly who I shared it for. Leave a comment and tell me your HOA horror story. Tell me how you spotted a scam, or how you didn't, but wish you had. Let's turn these comment sections into campfires, where people learn, laugh, and light the next person's way. And hey, if you never want to miss the next time someone tries to mess with the wrong dock, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap that bell like you're hitting a panic button labeled justice. Because around here, we've got more stories coming, more scams to expose, and more poetic justice just waiting to set sail.